Proposition 1 is on the ballot that's coming up right away next week, and people are asked to vote on it, yes or no. If it passes, it changes the Mental Health Services Act that we presently have into what we call a Behavioral Health Services Act. It also realigns the money that's flowing, and it also provides a second part where it's $6.8 billion in bond financing that will go to market to do a couple of things. One, there is some money for veterans housing, which I think is a good thing, and also some money to build different kinds of mental health facilities that are expensive. It's expensive end of the spectrum. And what it does to us in Orange County, it totally changes our system that has been quite successful, because the way money is now allocated to the same source is now going through different buckets, can no longer be used for many of our programs. I have a chart. It's what I call the spectrum of homelessness. It starts with prevention, then it gets into services, and finally shelter, which we call navigation. And then finally, after shelter, we have a housing component. We address all those now. There's some 53 programs countywide. The favorite part that I have is prevention. That's where the gate starts. Unless we work on prevention, more and more people come into the homelessness spectrum, which is far more expensive. And it's so hard to work through that whole system to get out. So I think the money is being misallocated. It's at the wrong end of the spectrum. It needs to be up front. Because now in Orange County, we're starting to move more and more toward prevention. I think that's the way we're going to shrink the homelessness population. If you keep going out to the far end, to the expensive end, which this Proposition 1 does, because it deals with more severely mentally ill, which is very expensive, instead of the general population, where we can eliminate more people and get them out of homelessness than the few who wind up in that severely mental ill side. So, and the other thing, we lose control. More of the old funding will now go to Sacramento for their use, and they'll direct programs, and we'll lose flexibility. We like to be flexible and be able to adjust as needed. We do the point-in-time count. It's more than just counting heads. It's assessing the needs of the people we find out on the street. We like to be able to adjust our programs. Now that kind of will have to go through Sacramento.
We have been following this ballot proposition, and we're working on a story for you on this. On the Secretary of State website, we saw that the yes side of this ballot proposition, the funding went up by $10 million, as if somebody donated $10 million in a matter of a few hours. Now, we're working on this story, and we're going to get it ready by Monday, because we're still checking some facts, and we're going to get it to you by Monday. You can get this story by clicking on the link below and signing up to our newsletter. We're going to send it to you, and many more. Now let's go back to the opinion.
In cities that have sober living homes, they tend to proliferate. It's a profitable business, and it takes away the ability to regulate them. We like to space them out if we can, keep them away from schools, for example, and maybe churches as well. Under this new Proposition 1, that will be more difficult. If they're in the right zone and the right circumstances, we would not be able to control it at all. So I think they'll tend to proliferate in the future. You may have a bunch of them in one neighborhood now, instead of being able to space them out. That's what some of the cities have done. Okay, you can have several living homes, but let's not have them all clustered. It's too much of an impact on that neighborhood. But I think we'll see that happening with that part of the language in Proposition 1. By the way, my trivia for the day, Proposition 1 refers to other code sections more than 800 times in its body. Then you go and start reading those code sections, and it refers to more code sections. And so there are a lot of little things hidden in there. And that's sort of where the sober living home thing comes out. I'm not against sober living homes. They serve a purpose. But if you're in a neighborhood or near a school, these are people that are recovering, and many of them are still on various medications, and they're kind of loose in the neighborhood. They're free to come and go, and it can have the wrong impact if it's too intense in one place. We do have a chart that we can put up, okay, and it's changing buckets and putting money where we don't think it's especially needed. And we have other things that are more needed in terms of being able to cure the problem. It's like about 163 million you see on the chart that's being shifted from our present programs into these other things. So it puts us in a difficult position. Many of our contracts with our nonprofits and other agencies that provide services will not be able to be continued. And one of the keys, I think, to ending homelessness, if we can, is consistent funding so the programs can continue year to year. So we're looking at having to end some of our programs if the money is shifted. Well, it still comes to the county, but it's in different buckets. And we have to work to provide something like the old school where we had more of a restricted environment for those severely mentally ill. It provides some beds for that situation that will be constructed. There's some issues too, while we may have some things built, how do you fund them on a continuing basis? There's some people issues in being able to fund what's being built. So it's a massive bill in terms of all the words and things that are in it. But this will be controlled through Sacramento. Well, it'll still flow through the counties, but on a more restricted basis and in places where we don't think it's particularly needed, because we're already handling what we think is a good program to help combat homelessness. So it's going to the more expensive end of the severely mentally ill instead of the prevention end. That prevention end, I think, is the most important, is at least costly, and it serves the most people. And the new buckets where the money is won't allow us to do prevention. There's some other issues too. We have programs for schools. We'll no longer be able to fund programs, mental health programs in schools, for example. I haven't had an interview with the governor exactly, but I think some of his advisors and people believe they need to address the most severely mentally ill end of the spectrum. And it's not necessarily homelessness that fits into that pocket, but it's being billed as a cure for homelessness. It really isn't. It's limiting the people who will be benefited by it and ignoring the other needs. So when I look at that way of putting money in the wrong spot instead of where it could go and be helpful, I think over the time that this may be in effect, we'll see more people with homelessness than it takes out. Well, the mechanism for allocation of the $6.8 billion bond money is not set forth. So we don't know exactly where that money is going to go anyway. And when I did a little calculation, if you're lucky and you can get the bonds out at 4% interest, over the life of the bonds, which is 30 years, you'll pay more in interest than the bonds themselves. So the way I look at it, we're taking future money away by paying interest instead of using it for the same purpose that the bonds are doing, which is, among other things, building more housing. And then creating another burden that has to be paid back. And then when you look at the state budget, what is it now, 80 billion in the red this year? That's not a good thing. When you speak about what we call substance use disorders, the drug problem, it's part of the money does go for that, and it's directed indeed in these new buckets. We're already doing that. We have in Orange County, we call it a Be Well facility, which not only treats mental health issues, but also substance use issues. For example, one of the interesting things, it has a sobering center. Police are specially trained. They can take someone that is been on what we call a deuce, a drunk driving charge, which might also involve drugs, something that is disabling. They can drop them off there instead of putting them in jail. They'll sober up in a sobering center instead of in a jail cell. Then when they recover, we'll begin to work on behavioral health issues and maybe make a change. So we have that type of ability here already. So to that extent, the Prop 1 is in sync with where we're trying to go, but we're already there. We'd like to keep the flexibility that we already have with the current funding. You know, I appreciate the thought and the effort to some of the things that are being thought about, but it's not where we need the effort right now. We need the effort in the beginning, because every year we see an increase in the number of homeless people in the state. Well, let's put a plug into that. We have people on the street, yes, they need attention. We need to do more. They have all sorts of ailments and issues. For example, in Orange County, we now have a street medicine program where we send people out to help those on the street that have medical needs. They don't have to go in and burden a ER facility, for example, which happens. We'll take care of them where they are in an earlier basis. So it's a whole spectrum we try to address. But if we can shorten the number of people coming in, then we have less to care for. And in time, we can work on those that are in that box, but let's keep people out of it in the first place.
We bring you stories that sometimes get ignored and details and facts that you may not find anywhere else. Make sure to click on the link below and sign up to our newsletter.